Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is our 29th installment of Pinch Hit Friday. Today, I want to talk to you about the neck. And I think it goes without saying that throwing is really hard on the shoulder and elbow. We certainly see this with the injury rates across baseball, but I don't think people appreciate just how challenging it is for the structures of the neck, the musculature, and certainly the joints themselves. But you get a brief burst of tone during the pitching delivery throughout the neck musculature, in part because you need some rigidity towards the spine in order to allow for distal mobility. One of the things that a lot of people over the years have discussed in the physical therapy literature and all that is that, proximal rigidity creates distal mobility. Is if everything is Gumby all the time, you can't really exert a lot of athleticism at a really high level. Now, with that said, remember that this happens really quickly in the throwing motion, right? The best throwers aren't rigid throughout the entire system for the entire delivery. They have to be relaxed and sequentially build up and time up stiffness so that they can be elastic, through a large range of motion. Nobody is just a block that goes down the mound. Instead, they're, basically relaxed through their upper extremity and it kind of builds from the lower half. And you get this specific point when they effectively transition from cocking into acceleration where they have to exert a lot of motion. If you're too rigid too soon, you can't get to the requisite positions to throw a baseball hard. Now, conversely, most arm care exercises we encounter require longer time under tension, right? You're doing a set of 15 reps or you're doing an isometric hold. And you have to be really careful about how prolonged rigidity, especially at the neck, can really have some unfavorable consequences when it's at the wrong position or in the wrong place in the anatomical structure. So this, downstream effect could be a loss of velocity, right? If you create an excessively rigid athlete over the course of time, they may lose some of that rotational capacity, some of that elasticity, but it can also create a predisposition to some sports medicine challenges. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see with athletes when they're doing their upper body work, especially kind of your classic arm care exercises, whether that's manual resistance exercises with trainers, or they're face down on a table, maybe even doing blood flow restricted training for higher volume. We see them aggressively recruiting the muscles surrounding the neck. In particular, we're talking about, the sternocleidomastoid, or the scalenes. These become very hypertonic. These muscles get much, much bigger, and they can be implicated not only in neck pain, but if you have a really gross SCM, we know that there's a little correlation with headaches, and then certainly thoracic outlet syndrome, which is something I've talked about a lot in the past. All of the nerves and the vascular structures of the upper extremity are going to originate on the neck, and there's a lot of research and anecdotal evidence that over time they can get more and more compressed in throwers. So certainly this can lead to altered blood flow to the throwing shoulder. There was a great study from Loudner years ago that basically showed that pitchers had diminished blood flow into their throwing arm as compared to the opposite side. But we can also get nerve symptoms, which are, a little bit harder to evaluate. They may not be really, really easy to see until somebody presents with, clinical symptoms of numbness, tingling, or just weakness, loss of function. And really that comes because nerves don't like to be compressed and they don't like to be stretched. So if we spend a lot of time building up a lot of tension, a lot of tone, tissue density further up the chain, it increases the likelihood that it's going to feel like somebody's stepping on that garden hose as it runs down into the throwing arm. So, pitching is hard enough on the throwing shoulder, elbow, and neck. We don't want to create more of these challenges with our exercise interventions. So with that said, in many cases, when you see an athlete doing arm care stuff and you see all kinds of tone going through their neck, the number one thing you can do is just tell them to relax. It's the simplest thing is make them aware of it, and you often will get a reduction in tone. But that said, often repositioning their head and neck will get the job done as well. You'll see a lot of people that go into kind of a forward head posture. They get a lot of upper cervical extension and they don't have a lot of lower cervical extension. So they kind of instantly get these really, really toned up scalenes. You'll often see like a really like firm jawline when they're doing it. So just be mindful of the position you put them in. And one of the biggest things I think you can do to help athletes out when they struggle with this is check to see if they're competing a lot against gravity. This is one reason why I don't love exercises that are done face down on a table with the athlete all the way to the end of the table with a portion of their torso at the edge. I think historically people would treat it kind of like a Superman exercise for the low back and say that we're building a lot of thoracic and lumbar extension capabilities for this. But in my mind, you're kind of just moving the kid to the end of the seesaw. That head is going to feel much, much heavier, and you're going to have a lot more tone going on, with people. So I generally like to bring people back down. If you're going to be face down, one good strategy, try throwing a pad under the belly. A lot of these athletes that we encounter in the baseball world are very lordotic. They have a heavy extensor bias. And when you put them into a lot of lumbar extension, their low back is arched, it tones up the lat. And most of the time, what we're trying to do with our arm care exercises is in direct opposition to the lat, right? We're trying to drive, more scapular posterior tilt. We're trying to drive some serratus recruitment to, basically drive scapular upward rotation. We may be trying to just get true shoulder flexion range of motion. So if you've got a latissimus dorsi that's really, really fired up, you're going to be kind of competing against that. So I tell people just put a pad under the belly, get them into a little bit more lumbar flexion, posterior pelvic tilt, and you'd be surprised at how much the movement competency improves. And we actually know there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that posterior tilt of the pelvis improves lower trap capabilities. You get better recruitment of that important muscle. Lastly, in that position, you can also bring people up to quadruped. You put them on all fours, and they don't have to work nearly as hard to put their head in a better position versus just being face down on the table, especially off the table. So cue them into a little bit of a double chin, good things happen. That said, beyond just the positioning strategies and just cueing athletes to relax, one strategy I've found that I can employ that really helps them out a lot with toning down the neck musculature is just to simply encourage them to exhale through the exertion phase or even just talk during the set. It's really, really hard to be excessively rigid through your neck if you're talking or if you're kind of exhaling just a little bit. Both the scalenes and the sternocleidomastoid are accessory respiratory muscles of inhalation. And so if you're going to be talking or exhaling, there has to be periods of exhalation that forces them to relax a little bit. So you can only build tension where you really want it. Last but not least, if you have someone that's really, really troublesome in this regard, a little bit of manual therapy on some of those involved muscles before the session actually begins sometimes can help you to get a little bit better recruitment where you want to be. But when in doubt, regress in exercise. If someone's having a really hard time, toning down the neck, put them in supine, get them to a point where they don't have to compete against gravity nearly as much, and then go through some scapular posterior tilt or some end range external rotation stuff with them at lower intensities, just so they can feel where the exercises are supposed to work. We don't want to recruit the wrong muscles on these important drills. So big picture, throwing super tough on not just the shoulder and elbow, but also the neck. We don't want to be excessively rigid throughout the entire delivery. And unfortunately, some arm care programs create that, particularly with respect to the neck. That can have some huge, unfavorable downstream consequences. So we want to make sure as we put athletes in the right position, encourage them to relax the neck, get them to talk or exhale during the sessions. And when in doubt, just regress them to something where they can feel things at a lower intensity and gradually build up to more comprehensive exercises. You'll see some amazing downstream effects if you get the neck in the right position and you reduce some tone. People are going to feel a lot better. They're also going to recover a lot better between throwing outings. So give it a shot and hope it works out. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much for tuning in. This episode is brought to you by AG1, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it can be difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can often wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where AG1 can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. That's why I use it daily, as do several of my family members, and we recommend it to a lot of our top athletes. One scoop of AG1 contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients that work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet to support energy, focus, digestion, and recovery. And this can all happen for less than $3 per day and without taking multiple products. While most nutritional supplements come to market and stay stagnant, AG1 continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing over 50 improvements in the last decade alone. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best tasting nutrition happen on the planet. Whether you're keto, Paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, it'll work for you, and it contains less than 1 gram of sugar per serving. They put 75 ingredients through the rigorous NSF certification test to come up with a safe formula that's trusted by some of the world's top athletes, including many of our own at Cressey Sports Performance. Right now, AG1 is giving our listeners a special offer of 10 free travel packets with their first purchase. Just head to drinkag1.com/Cressey and claim this special offer. These travel packets are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health while you're traveling for games, training, or simply on the go. They can be great counterbalance to the less than ideal on-the-road food options that are out there for a lot of our traveling baseball players. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance of getting nutrient diversity, head to drinkag1.com/Cressey to get 10 free travel packets with your first purchase. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Cressey, Cressey. You won't regret it.